Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanic. And if you enjoy this fanic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanic like this. And now let's start the fanic.
Naruto sat on his knees, staring at the grave sites in front of him. He and his team had just finished their first C-ranked mission, although certain variables inevitably upgraded it to an A- rank. And now both of those variables lay buried in the earth. Zabuza Momochi and his partner Haku. It had started out like any other basic escort mission. Naruto and his squad traveling slowly through the land of fire to get to a port that would take them to Wave Country. But then everything changed when they were ambushed by a pair of Kurigakure Chunin known as the Demon Brothers. The battle was short, but it foreshadowed an even greater threat laying in wait for them. That threat came in the form of the Kiri's former Seven Swordsman member Zabuza, Demon of the Mist, and master of the silent killing technique. After a hard-fought battle, where the trio of genin were forced to face the demon alone and save their sensei, Squad 7 managed to pull out a win. Or so they thought. Naruto's Junin instructor, Kakashi, informed the team that Zabuza had survived the encounter. The hunter ninja that had taken him out was a fake. Estimating it would take their adversary at least a week to recover, Kakashi used that time to introduce his genin to chakra control exercises. Naruto and his teammates practiced the tree climbing technique for 7 days before they were back in action and ready for round 2. That's where things got dicey. The reason being, over the course of that week Naruto had met and made a friend, someone who taught him a valuable lesson. When you fight to protect someone, that is when you become truly strong. The young boy's words struck a chord with the blonde and left Naruto with a lot to think about. The following day they met up again. The boy was gathering more herbs like before, to aid in his friend's recovery, and Naruto was more than happy to help. After that, the two spent time talking before the older raven-haired boy said he needed to return home. Naruto said his goodbyes and went back to his training, hopeful that he would get to see his friend again tomorrow. That, tomorrow, happened to be the day Zabuza struck again, and when the blonde finally arrived on the scene, the Naruto found himself wishing that he hadn't been so hopeful. Because his friend, Haku, turned out to be Zabuza's accomplice. The feeling of betrayal weighed heavily on the young leaf ninja's shoulders as he did battle with his former friend. Naruto attempted to get the former mist ninja to withdraw, make him see that they didn't have to fight, but Haku would always just reply with the same response. I want to protect the person important to me. I want to work for that person. I want to fight for that person. I want to make that person's dreams come true. That is my dream. And so they fought. But even with Sasuke awakening his Sharingan, the two genin were no match for Haku and his crystal ice mirrors. However, Haku realized that drawing out the battle any longer could result in his defeat, so with an apology to his foes, he struck. A hail of Senbon rained down upon Naruto and Sasuke. It was after not feeling any pain that Naruto opened his eyes, the ones he hadn't realized he'd closed, and was greeted with a horrific sight. Sasuke Uchiha, his teammate and friend, lay at his feet covered in needles. His body leaking blood from every wound. Sasuke had sacrificed himself to save the blonde. Everything went red for Naruto after that. The blonde only remembered feeling an intense rage, almost hatred, but the events that took place after still escape him. Kakashi would later inform him of how, after subduing both Haku and Zabuza, he'd chopped the blonde in the neck. The next thing Naruto did recall was hearing Gato clap, and then the bloodbath brought on by an angry Zabuza, who fought with only a single kunai in his mouth to avenge the recently fallen Haku. Naruto would later learn that it had been Kakashi that had done the boy in with his Reikiri. Soon after, once Zabuza had killed Gato and the people of Wave forced out the thugs threatening their village, Naruto and his team encircled the dying mist ninja and the lifeless body of Haku as it started, surprisingly, to snow. Zabuza spoke of just how much Haku meant to him, the boy's loyalty and his friendship despite the swordsman's own cruel and blunt nature. Of how he wished he could follow Haku into heaven, if only so that he could tell the young ninja in person, just once, how important he really was to Zabuza. But it was not to be, and the powerful swordsman passed from the land of the living burdened with that regret. Yet through it all, Naruto Uzumaki felt more respect for Zabuza than he had ever felt for any other person in his life. I thought I might find you here, a calm voice echoed from behind Naruto. The orange-clad blonde turned his head to see the form of his sensei walking up to him. Letting out a pained sigh, Naruto replied, "Yeah, I just wanted to say goodbye one more time before we head out tomorrow." Kakashi looked on with his one eye as his student turned back to the two makeshift graves he'd constructed for the dead Kiri shinobi. Over each mound of dirt were wooden crosses made from stakes the blonde had carved from tree branches. Zabuza's blade, Kubikiribocho, thrust into the ground behind his marker. The silver-haired Junin noticed how Naruto's gaze would linger on Zabuza's sword, as if trying to will the man back to life to take hold of it again. This surprised the elite ninja, having never seen such a look on the young boy's face. "I know it's hard, Naruto, but he died a death that was more than honorable for someone of his status," Kakashi said as he placed a hand on his student's shoulder. But he was surprised when his gesture was shrugged off. Naruto turned and looked into Kakashi's lone eye with one of his own as he said, "Oh yeah. And now what happens, huh? Is his name just gonna fade into the wind? Because I doubt Mist will put it on their memorial stone. I bet they're just gonna sweep all this up and paint him as some sort of defective weapon that they couldn't control and use him as some example of what not to be." "So you're saying you care about the reputation of an enemy ninja, a man that attempted to end your life in pursuit of his own goals?" Kakashi asked in curiosity. He'd never heard of something like this happening before. Usually a ninja was all too happy to drag an enemy's name through the mud if it meant their own fame would increase. The Junin instructor was pulled from his musings by the blonde genin's voice as he replied, "Of course I care. Zabuza was more than just some enemy ninja. He was a person, with his own ambitions and dreams. He was also a powerful ninja who deserves respect, and just thinking about what's probably going to happen to his reputation makes me so mad." Naruto's outburst caused Kakashi to lean back a little due to the volume, but that didn't take away from the message he got. His student held the demon of the mist in extremely high regard, and wished for people to remember the fallen ninja with honor. This cemented a decision he'd been turning over in his head the past few nights while the bridge was being finished. So, standing back to his full height, Kakashi turned as if to leave and said, "You know, something I learned about the seven swordsmen of the mist is that, whenever a member falls, their blade is passed down to whoever managed to slay them. And while technically Zabuza died from his wounds, I'd say you were the one to defeat him. It was your words that changed his mind and made him put his life on the line to avenge Haku. You defeated the demon of the mist, Naruto. Kubikiribocho belongs to you now, if you want it." And with that, the older male walked away, leaving a wide-eyed blonde sitting with his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Naruto closed his mouth, and then swiveled his head around to return his gaze to the giant blade buried in the earth. Did he dare take it? While it was true he wanted the demon of the mist to be remembered with respect, Naruto wasn't sure he was truly good enough to carry on the name. He was after all the dead last in the academy. What if I just end up embarrassing myself? What if I don't have what it takes? Zabuza was a true elite ninja, a master of stealth with more kills under his belt than most of the ninja from my own village, and on top of that he was as powerful as Kakashi-sensei without using some special power. Kakashi-sensei even said that he'd need the Sharingan to battle Zabuza. Can I really reach that kind of level? It was a glint of light that brought the blonde out of his swirling thoughts. Blinking his shocking blue eyes rapidly, Naruto turned his attention to where the gleam was coming from, and realized it was coming from the very sword he was debating about. Naruto noticed that it was now midday. He'd been out there all morning, and so the sun was in the center of the sky, casting its light down upon all that lived beneath it. This caused Zabuza's sword to reflect the light, catching Naruto in the eye. With his attention returned to the blade, Naruto soon found himself lost in the reflection of himself that stared back at him. For what felt like hours he stared into his own blue eyes, searching for something that he couldn't identify, before breaking the trance to look upwards towards his headband. After staring at the reflection of his headpiece, the young Uzumaki returned to looking at his own reflection. It was after another minute of silent staring that Naruto reached up and turned his headband to the side. XXX. Kakashi stood with two of his genin along the end of the Great Naruto Bridge. All of Wave Country seemed to be standing along the massive structure with the intent to see the team of ninja off. Now they just needed their fourth member. What's taking that idiot so long? We were supposed to have left hours ago, Kakashi-sensei. Sakura wailed to her superior. Beside her, Sasuke just raised a questioning eyebrow. Kakashi didn't even bother to look up from his book as he replied, "Don't worry, Sakura, I'm sure Naruto's on his way now. You know how he likes to spend time at the grave sites." "Yeah, I guess, but the mission's over and I wanna go home. Not that I don't appreciate Tazuna-san's hospitality, but I just really miss my own bed." "Well, you'll be seeing it soon," Sasuke cut in. "Here comes the loser now." And he was right. Through the crowd of people, each member of Team 7 could see a mop of blonde hair making its way towards them. Soon Naruto exited the sea of people and greeted his fellow squad mates. Two of the three were surprised by what greeted them. Naruto stood before them, looking mostly the same, but there were two distinct differences. One was the fact that his headband had been turned sideways, and the other, more obvious thing, was the fact that he had the sword that belonged to Zabuza strapped across his back. Almost immediately Sakura was in his face growling. "Naruto, you moron, what do you think you're doing with that sword? What kind of ninja robs someone's grave?" She ended her interrogation with a fist to the top of Naruto's skull. Naruto massaged the small knot on his head as he answered his crush. "I didn't steal it, Sakura-chan. Ask Kakashi-sensei if you want, but I heard what you said about wanting to go home, so maybe we can talk about this later," he said in a subdued tone. The pink-haired girl was a little taken back by the low, tired voice her usually loud teammate spoke with. She eyed him with concern for a moment, before turning to her sensei, and then saying, "You're right, I do want to go home, so let's just go." With that, the foursome made their exit from Wave Country, leaving behind a cheering crowd and taking with them each their own set of memories. XXX. The trip back to Konoha was uneventful. No ninja hiding in puddles waiting to attack. And while Sasuke was busy flashing his newly acquired Sharingan on and off, with Sakura complimenting the Uchiha on how powerful it made him look, Naruto remained silent. As he sped through the trees, the blonde's mind was continuously going over his decision to take up Zabuza's mantle. While he decided that it was what he wanted, he still had to think about how best to go about it. More specifically, what he'd need to work on to be a worthy successor. Naruto knew that his taijutsu needed work. He only knew the basics of the academy style, and even then he'd skipped classes, so there were definite holes in his stance. The blonde thought back to the rogue ninja's style, and how he incorporated not just punches, but kicks, elbows, and even his sword into his attack patterns. Next he thought about his repertoire of ninjutsu. At the moment Naruto counted that he had 3 combat jutsu and 1 ineffective technique that, if he was going to take this seriously, he would need to throw out. "So that leaves me with the hench, kawarimi, and my kage bunshin," the blonde deduced. "If I really wanna do this, I'm gonna need to seriously step up my game." Zabuza used some pretty high-level techniques, and then there's his hit-and-miss jutsu. Problem is, where am I gonna get somebody to teach me it? Figuring he'd deal with that later, the blonde then turned his thoughts towards his speed and strength. One he lacked, the other needed work. Naruto hadn't even been able to keep up with Zabuza's movements during their first encounter. The man moved so fast it was mind-boggling. Then there was his strength, made obvious by the way he easily handled his large executioner's blade with just one hand, whereas Naruto was forced to use both just to pull it from the ground. Naruto knew he probably had the highest physical strength among his graduating class, having spent many nights conditioning his body, but he knew it wasn't going to be enough if he was to become the new demon of the mist. That's another thing, Naruto thought to himself. Am I still the demon of the mist if I'm a ninja of the hidden leaf? Was Zabuza's title based off his village, or his jutsu? Shaking his head, the blonde decided that, even if the title was originally coined from the man's village, he would make it based off his use of the technique itself, once he found a way to learn it. Naruto recalled only actually seeing Zabuza do it once, and unfortunately that wasn't enough. For him. Suddenly Naruto's eyes widened with inspiration as he remembered an impromptu lesson he'd received on the battlefield about the Uchiha clan's special dojutsu. Turning his blue-eyed gaze in the direction of his Junin instructor, Naruto remembered that behind the man's slanted headband was one of those famous copy wheel eyes, and he'd seen Zabuza use the technique he wanted to learn. With plans to speak with his sensei after reporting into Old Man Sarutobi, Naruto settled down and relaxed the rest of the trip home. XXX. So your C rank turned into an A- rank, and yet you continued on, knowingly putting your genin in danger. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Sandaime, asked the Junin in front of him. Kakashi nervously scratched behind his head as he replied. Well, I asked them if they wanted to return home, but each of them was hellbent on aiding the people of Wave. They said something about not being able to turn away from a country in need. It was really quite noble, Lord Hokage. Hiruzen steepled his fingers and eyed each of the 3 genin that stood in his office. When his eyes landed on Naruto, he spoke up again. And as the reason you've brought the famed head cleaver home, so that you could collect the bounty on Zabuza's head. The old man hid his surprise when the blonde shot him a disgusted look, as if such a thing were a form of blasphemy. Naruto opened his mouth to speak, but Kakashi beat him to it. Actually, Lord Hokage, Naruto thought it'd be interesting to learn how to use the sword. He saw the way Zabuza almost defeated me with it, and figured if he could get as good he'd be that much more likely to take that hat from you. The elderly Kage eyed his Junin suspiciously but didn't say any more on the subject. Instead, he let out a sigh and said, very well then. Mission accomplished, Squad 7. You may pick up your paychecks tomorrow after we've recalculated the amounts to hand out. For now, you are dismissed. After bidding goodbye to their leader, the members of Squad 7 left the Hokage's office and began exiting the building. Once outside, Sasuke ignored Sakura's request to walk her home and began the trek to his clan compound alone. Naruto, seeing the young girl's sad eyes, attempted to cheer her up. Hey Sakura-chan, if you want, I'll walk you home after I'm done talking to Kakashi-sensei. The sadness in Sakura's green eyes quickly turned to annoyance as she turned to look at her other teammate. Naruto Baka, how many times do I have to tell you? I don't wanna go out with you, and I don't wanna spend time with you outside of team stuff. You're annoying. With that, the young Kunoichi huffed and walked off, leaving Naruto to slump a little in defeat. Sighing in resignation, the blonde turned his attention to his sensei, who had stopped and waited after hearing that his student wanted to talk to him. Naruto then asked, Kakashi-sensei, I can copy pretty much any jutsu, right? Peering over the top of his book, the silver-haired Junin regarded his student with a curious brow. Just about, yeah, unless it's a technique tailored specifically for that ninja, like Haku's mirrors. Why? Because I was hoping you were able to copy Zabuza's hidden mist jutsu on that you could tell me how to do it. The older man was a little shocked at his student's request. What he'd said back in the Hokage's office was actually pretty close to what he thought was the truth, leaving out the admiration Naruto had for Zabuza for obvious reasons. So the fact that he asked to learn one of another village's signature jutsu threw him off. Eyeing the blonde cautiously, he asked, I did actually. Why? What do you want with it? Your genin student asks you for help and your first instinct is to question him. Naruto asked with an attitude. It is when I don't see any reason to teach him what he wants to know. Naruto turned his eyes away for a few moments, mulling over whether or not to reveal his true intentions before finally looking to Kakashi again. Quote. I want to become the next demon of the mist, but to do that, I need to know the technique that helped make Zabuza so famous. Now Kakashi's eye was wide, his eyebrow disappearing into his slanted headband. His masked mouth hung open in shock before he replied. And Naruto, do you understand what you just said? Do you understand what it means to take on that mantle? Because I don't think you do. The blonde in question just lowered his head, blue eyes hidden by shadows as he answered. Actually, I do. That mission opened my eyes, Kakashi-sensei. It helped me realize that being a ninja is more than just flashy moves and a fancy nicknames. I learned that being a ninja is about stealth, and being able to think ahead, to be able to shed the blood of another human being, because when it comes down to it, it's either you or them. I understand that, to truly honor Zabuza, I have to become a real shinobi. Naruto's speech hit the copy ninja hard. He'd never met a genin that spoke with such passion or understanding of what it meant to take up the title of ninja. It was more than just putting on a headband, it was forging yourself into something beyond human. However, Kakashi needed to know one more thing before making his decision. Naruto, do you think you're ready to become the next demon of the mist? Quote. No, Naruto answered. I'm not ready, but that's why I'm going to train, for real this time. On the way back to the village, I went over the basics of what I need to improve on, and now it's time that I get to work. I'm not ready now, but I will be. That was all Kakashi needed to hear. Okay, Naruto, come with me and I'll teach you how to use the hidden mist jutsu. XXX. The morning after his return from Wave found Naruto snoozing in his bed. The day before, he'd gotten Kakashi to teach him how to do the hidden mist jutsu, though the surprise came when the young knucklehead learned that the technique wasn't solely dictated by a body of water, and that a caster could breath the mist out from their mouth. From there, it was simply a matter of figuring out how to transform his chakra into the right nature. This led to Naruto wondering about what the Junin meant by nature, and ultimately to Kakashi handing his student a very plain-looking scrap of paper. It's meant to react whenever someone feeds a bit of their chakra into it. Then, depending on what sort of element you align with, the scrap will change. Go ahead and try it first, and then I'll explain what your result means. The last Uzumaki quickly discovered that he was actually a wind type, which disappointed him at first, but those feelings were mollified by Kakashi explaining that such a thing didn't mean he couldn't use other techniques, just that it would take more effort to do so. Case in point being the fact Naruto had already managed to perform Zabuza's famous technique. And while the blonde was put out that he'd probably never learn the fireball jutsu that Sasuke loved to show off, he was glad to know that his massive reserves would help turn the hidden mist jutsu into an impenetrable shroud that not even the Uchiha's legendary eyes could see through. It was a small comfort, but it was the first step on the long road to his goal. Afterwards, Naruto had gone to Ichiraku's to regale the father-daughter duo of his time in Wave. It was on the walk home that he noticed the looks he was getting. Now Naruto had grown used to being looked at, mostly in disgust or anger, but this time the citizens looked at him with confusion, and a little bit of fear. Or rather, they looked at his sword with fear. Naruto knew the civilians didn't understand the true nature of the blade, so he guessed they were just afraid that he had it. This made Naruto scoff. After returning home, he completed his workout and then went to bed. He had a busy day tomorrow. The following morning, letting out a yawn, the young genin rose from his bed ready to begin the day. After finishing his morning routine, the blonde went to get dressed. And then he stopped. As he looked at himself in the mirror, Naruto realized something. His wardrobe needed an upgrade. The blonde thought about how he'd seen not only Zabuza dress, but Haku and Kakashi-sensei as well. All three of them wore dark or neutral colors that helped keep them hidden in their environment. Staring at his reflection in the mirror, at his orange pants and his orange jacket yet to be zipped up revealing the black shirt underneath, Naruto cringed. I can't strike fear into my opponents looking like this, but where am I gonna get new clothes? Everywhere I go the people want sell to me. Unless they don't know it's me they're selling to. Setting up his hands in the proper sign, and then a puff of smoke later, Naruto was replaced with a young brunette boy, with green eyes, dressed in basic civilian clothes. It didn't take long for Naruto to find a store that sold shinobi items. Being a ninja village meant that many of the stores catered to that group of clientele. With a ringing of the bell atop the door, the disguised Uzumaki made his way inside a store that looked promising. When the young woman behind the counter didn't say anything, Naruto had to hold back a grin at how successful his plan was turning out. Why hadn't he thought of this before? Scanning the shop looking for his section, the former blonde noticed that there were two women by the dressing rooms talking. The first one he recognized from the academy. She'd been a guest speaker in their genjutsu class. Kuronai Yuhi, if memory served right. She was beautiful, something Naruto could see even with his crush on Sakura. She had shoulder length, raven black hair and piercing red eyes that were shadowed with liner. The older Kunoichi was outfitted in a thigh-length dress that was a mixture between a kimono and medical tape. One of the sleeves had been torn away, and this showed that her entire arm, from bicep to fingertip, was wrapped in bandages. Naruto could see mesh armor underneath from the neckline of her dress. Kuronai wore standard shinobi sandals and her headband was used to keep her hair out of her face. Turning his gaze over Naruto was met with the sight of another beautiful young woman, this one Naruto hadn't seen before. Her hair was purple, and tied back in a fanning ponytail. Her eyes were a light brown, and were pupil-less, but that only added to their look in Naruto's mind. The kunoichi was dressed in a tan trench coat and a mesh shirt, her lower body barely covered by her burnt orange skirt. Naruto saw that she also wore shin guards, along with the standard shinobi sandals. Apparently, he'd been staring too long, because the purple-haired woman turned her eyes on him and said, "Hey kid, why don't you take a picture, it'll last longer." This snapped Naruto out of his stupor, and shaking his head to clear his mind answered, "Sorry, I didn't mean to stare, I just, got caught up in checking out two hot women. There's no need to deny it, but next time remember the golden rule, glance and turn." Otherwise, here Naruto lost sight of her, until he felt cold steel pressed gently against his cheek. You may just get hurt. Swallowing the lump in his throat, the disguised Uzumaki nodded before saying, "Lesson learned. Again, I'm sorry for staring." Anko pulled away from him and patted him on the shoulder. "Good. Sorry if I scared ya. I just feel it's my duty as a woman to curb any early signs of perversion, so that there are at least a few decent men in the world, you know." Anko, enough. If you keep antagonizing the kid, I won't treat you to dango and you'll have to buy it yourself. Kuronai cut in, taking pity on the young boy. This got the other kunoichi's attention quickly. "No. Okay, I'll stop. Just anything but that." Smirking in satisfaction, Kuronai said, "Good, then let's go. We've been here way too long and you haven't even bought anything." As she followed her raven-haired friend out the door, Anko muttered, "Of course I didn't, we were there for you, remember." Once he was alone again, Naruto shook his head in amusement before turning his attention back to the matter at hand, outfitting himself like a true shinobi. XXX. While Naruto perused the racks of clothing back in the store, Anko and Kuronai walked down through the streets heading for Anko's favorite shop. It was a few minutes before the purple-haired kunoichi spoke up, her voice laced with curiosity. "Was it just me, or was that kid back in the store wearing a hench?" "No, I noticed it too," Kuronai replied. "That's weird. You have any idea who it could have been, or why they might have been doing it?" Kuronai shook her head. "I'm really not sure about the why, but I have a good guess as to who." This interested Anko. "Really? Who is it, and how do you know?" By this time they'd made it to the dango shop, and both women sat down at the bar. While the tea and ice specialist motioned her order to the man behind the counter, Kuronai answered her question. "I'm pretty sure it was Naruto Uzumaki." Anko's face crinkled in confusion. "The brat your little Hyuga girl's got a crush on." "How do you know?" "He's one of only a handful of people with a chakra signature as noticeable as the one he's got. the others being Lord Hokage, Kakashi, and Guy. And I don't see any reason they'd be using a transformation jutsu to go into a clothing store. But why does the kid need to sneak into a clothing store? Anko asked around a mouthful of the dumplings that had just been handed to her. Because many of the villagers don't get too happy when he enters their shops. At least that's what Hinata's told me from watching him. The rest of their time together, Anko's face would remain scrunched in thought. XXX. Inside one of the changing stalls, Naruto had undone his disguise and was checking himself in the mirror. His torso was covered in a sleeveless, black hoodie zipped to the top. His lower body was hidden away underneath a pair of black cargo pants, with his kunai and shuriken holsters strapped to his thigh and hip respectively. On his feet were the regulation sandals, and his wrists were taped. His headband was tied around his forehead, but remained turned to the side, and finally, Naruto had wrapped white medical tape around the lower half of his face. The blonde turned from one side to the other, taking in his new look, before grinning in satisfaction and changing before replacing his hench. After that was done, he gathered his clothes, and proceeded towards the register to check out. Once finished buying his new clothes, and making sure he had extra, Naruto exited the store and returned home, where he then proceeded to once again drop his transformation jutsu. As he was putting his new wardrobe away, the blonde thought about what his first step should be to reaching his goal. I should probably work on my taijutsu first, he said quietly to himself. And with that thought in mind, Naruto once again left his little apartment to make his way towards the library. It used to be that Naruto wasn't particularly allowed in the library. The woman who ran it banned him for being a troublemaker, but now that he was an official ninja of the village, Naruto was granted a special level of access to certain sections of the building. However, with Konoha being a ninja village, there were still some sections that only Chunin or above-level shinobi were allowed to pull from. Naruto was fine with that for now. The amount of knowledge available to him now was vastly superior to the scraps he'd been fed in the academy, so the blonde decided to make do with what he was given, and be happy with it. His obvious first stop was the taijutsu section, followed swiftly by a section dedicated to training exercises. Taking a handful of both types, the blonde ambled over to a table and sat down, before opening up the first taijutsu scroll. The Kam no Ken, or Turtle Fist, specializes in counter-attacks. This style uses the openings your opponent creates when they attack against them, primarily used by defensive fighters. After reading the description, Naruto knew immediately that this wasn't the style for him. He was anything but a defensive fighter, so he moved on to the next scroll in the stack. This one was called the Hachidori Ken, Hummingbird Fist. That style was quick, and used jabs as its primary attack, but it required an intense amount of speed to be effective. Something Naruto didn't have. This went on for over an hour, Naruto nearly losing his mind at the revelation that there were so many styles of fighting, until finally the blonde genin found the scroll he'd been looking for. After opening the parchment, and reading the description, Naruto's face lit up into a 1,000-watt smile. He'd found his new taijutsu style. The Ono Ken, King's Fist. This style not only incorporated using more than just standard punches and kicks, it was also based on strength. Naruto read further and found it got a huge boost if the user was fast, although speed wasn't the primary element. And although it didn't have a 5-star defense, Naruto believed in striking first and taking out your enemy before they had a chance to counter. With his new taijutsu style selected, Naruto moved on to finding training methods to become a more effective ninja. The first one he looked at wasn't a technique, but a method. Weights. This was something that the blonde had heard of, but had never thought to try because he'd still had his head in the clouds. But now, with the realization that his current level wasn't going to cut it anymore, Naruto decided that weights may just be a good idea. And if weights seemed like a good idea, then the chakra control exercises he found were fantastic. Naruto remembered how many more clones he was able to produce after learning the tree walking technique, so he bet the water walk and waterfall run would be huge helps too. It had amazed the blonde to see Zabuza and Kakashi-sensei duking it out atop the water back in wave, so much that he hoped the silver-haired Junin would teach it to him, and now here it was, ready for him to master. Another chakra control exercise he saw was the leaf concentration that he'd done in the academy. This one the blonde skipped over though, because he felt there was nothing to gain from it, and so then moved on to the next scroll. This went on for another half hour before Naruto decided that it would be a good idea to get some training in. So, he returned most of the scrolls he'd taken, and left with the few that he'd need to look at for reference. I'll pick up scrolls on Kenjutsu tomorrow, Naruto reminded himself as he walked out the door. Sensei probably won't have us doing any real missions for a while, so I'll have time to work on my training. I can also pick up my weights too, because if this is anything like the tree walking exercise, I'll be spending all day training. As he moved through the busy streets, Naruto wondered if it was okay to leave Kubikiribocho alone in his apartment. Because while no one really bothered him, there had been a select few that took it upon themselves to trash his home when he was younger. But then Naruto shook that thought from his mind. He was a ninja now, and no civilian was stupid enough to mess with a member of the village military, no matter how they felt about him. It took him about another half hour to walk to the training ground Kakashi had taken them to for their bell test. Naruto had chosen this particular place to train because it had a large body of water for him to practice water walking on, as well as trees to hone his tree walking technique when he had time. Once arriving, the blonde was quick to get to work. Stripping away his new shirt, the blonde sat down on the grass and reread the water walking scroll. It explained that, to perform the technique, the user needed to emit a constant stream of chakra from the bottom of their feet and then use the repellent force to walk across the water's surface. Naruto also noticed that the scroll mentions that walking on water is more difficult than trees because the amount of chakra needing to be emitted changes constantly. After reading through the instructions, Naruto walked over towards the large lake. Closing his eyes and setting his hands into the ram symbol, the blonde proceeded to take a single step out and place his foot on the surface of the water. When he went to put pressure on it, he sank. Feeling his foot get enveloped in cold water, Naruto pulled his leg back and grimaced. Well damn, I guess this needs more chakra than the tree walking. Alright then, let's go for round 2. XXX. An exhausted Naruto lay flat on his back under the late afternoon sky. He'd been practicing his new chakra control exercise for hours, and the sky was beginning to take on a fiery orange hue. An hour before, Naruto finally managed to keep himself above water for a grand total of 3 minutes. After his success, the blonde took to using the next hour for physical workouts, so as to better condition his body. I'm beat, the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki thought to himself. It must be this water walking thing really is tough, because even walking up trees didn't wear me out this bad. Deciding it was a good time to head home, Naruto pushed himself up onto his hands, grabbed his discarded hoodie, and stood up. Swaying a little from the constant fluctuation of his chakra, the blonde put his top back on, and then turned his head when he heard a noise. Naruto sighed when he noticed a badly done disguise being held up against one of the trees. Konohamaru, I know it's you. Your stealth sucks, remember? The tarp fell and revealed a young boy dressed in a yellow t-shirt, gray shorts, a blue scarf, and a pair of green goggles. I'd expect nothing less from my greatest rival. Way to see through my cover, Naruto Nisan. Not that I'm not happy to see you, but was there something you wanted, Konohamaru? Because I was just about to go eat and head home. Konohamaru's onyx black eyes widened before he asked, well, can I come with you, please? I wanted to spar, but we can do this instead, and you can tell me about that mission you went on. Naruto could see the hope in the younger boy's eyes. He really just wanted to spend time with the blonde, it didn't matter how. Deciding that it wouldn't be a problem, Naruto told him, sure Konohamaru, let's go. The youth jumped and cheered before following after his idol. It was as they were navigating through the now sparsely crowded streets that the young Sarutobi inquired about Naruto's new attire. Hey boss, I like the new look, but what made you decide to give up your old jumpsuits? Well, it ties in with the mission I'm gonna tell you about, but let's just say that I realized how much more seriously I'll be taken if I'm not wearing such bright colors. But boss, that jumpsuit helped you stand out. It let everyone know that you were Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto chuckled lightly at his younger friend's point of view. Was that how he was before his mission to wave? Deciding to answer the boy's question, Naruto said, "Exactly, Konohamaru. It made me stand out. Being a ninja, I need to be able to blend in, be stealthy, and I can't do that if I'm wearing bright orange, like how you won't be very effective wearing yellow." At that moment the blonde noticed they'd arrived at the ramen bar, so he and his shadow took their seats and ordered. Once that was done, Naruto turned to Konohamaru and began to retell his adventures in Wave Country. Throughout the story the young academy student flashed through multiple different emotions. He thought about how cool it must have been to have gone beyond Konoha's walls, felt surprised to hear about how his idol had froze up against the demon brothers, and he also felt pride when Naruto told him of how he'd outsmarted a Junin. By the end of the tale their food had arrived, so both of them turned to enjoy it for a few bites before the younger boy said, "Wow Naruto, that sounds like it was dangerous. I can't believe you managed to get one over on a Junin, you're amazing." Naruto smiled, although with his new look you could only tell by his eyes unless looking closely, and said, "Thanks Konohamaru, but I didn't do it alone, although next time I'll be sure to be more helpful. That's what I was doing out at the training grounds. I need to get a lot stronger." "Oh, hey, can we spar tomorrow? We can meet up where I found you earlier and you and I can duke it out. How's that sound?" At first Naruto was going to agree just because he knew how much the younger boy missed him, but then he remembered that Konohamaru was an academy student, and tomorrow was Wednesday. Konohamaru, don't you have class tomorrow?" For a brief moment the youngest Sarutobi's face became a mask of sadness, but then it brightened as he replied, "Well yeah, I do, but I can skip it and we can hang out instead." But the blonde Uzumaki was already shaking his head, no. When he saw the confused look on Konohamaru's face he elaborated. "Actually, I want you to go to class tomorrow, okay? But Naruto-Nisan, you used to skip class all the time, what's the big deal if I do it?" "I skipped class because nobody cared if I went. It didn't matter whether I showed up or not because everybody was happier when I wasn't there. But you have people who want you to succeed Konohamaru, and if you skip school to hang out with me you'll be disappointing those people, me included. I know the classes can be boring, but they are important, even if you don't think so right now. They lay the groundwork for you to become a talented shinobi, and I want you to have the best grip on it as possible. We'll spend time together on a day you don't have class, okay?" After listening to his idol's words, the younger boy could only nod in acceptance. "All right boss, but only because you promised we could spar when I don't have to go to school." With that the two ate the rest of their meal, telling jokes and stories, having a good time until it was time to go. Once he finished dropping off the brunette, Naruto made his way back to his apartment, and after making sure his sword was still under the floorboards, collapsed on his bed and fell asleep. Naruto let out a grunt of effort as he pushed one of his clones away and then turned to block a downward slash from another to his right. His Kubikiribocho clashed loudly with the one his clone possessed, and the muscles in his arms tensed to hold back the assault. Suddenly, Naruto's eyes widened at the feeling of being cleaved in half, before the body erupted into a cloud of smoke. Both clones searched frantically for the original, unfortunately one of them was too slow, and was soon beheaded by a spinning blade. The surviving clone looked on as the giant cleaver was brought down by gravity and buried in the earth. "Oh come on, I swear I had it that time," cried the original Naruto, who was hanging from the tree that he'd aimed the sword from. Looking over to its creator, the clone said, "At least it got closer. A month ago you couldn't even throw it, now you only miss the tree by like 10 feet. Naruto called back his chakra and let himself land on the ground. Pulling his weapon from its earthy sheath, he replied, "I suppose you're right, and I've managed to pull off a couple one-handed swings before needing to go back to two, so that's something, right?" After his clone nodded, Naruto dismissed the doppelganger with a cloud of smoke. With a sigh, the blonde replaced his blade in the strap across his shirtless back and stretched. It had been a little over 3 months since his return to the village and, if he did say so himself, he was making great strides in his training. His physical ability had taken a satisfying jump, seeing as he'd taken to performing workouts multiple days a week, rather than just every once in a while with heavy weights. It was a routine that included a multitude of body weight exercises along with using free weights, his cardio easily coming in from the brawls he go into with his clones. The blonde remembered waking up one morning and being surprised at the reflection that greeted him in the mirror. With the increased strength came increased speed as well, thanks to the ankle weights he wore. Naruto dared to think he was now among the fastest genin in his graduating class, behind only Sasuke and Kiba now if he were to have any competition. But that gap would soon close as well. Along with his physical increases came chakra strength too. Naruto could now create twice as many clones as before, and each could now create a small army of their own too. The blonde had also taken to learning how to master the kawarimi, deciding that it was a move many ninja forgot about because of the fancier techniques, and yet it was just as effective and dangerous. But Naruto didn't stop at just fine-tuning an old trick. No, the young Uzumaki decided that adding a few new jutsu to his list couldn't hurt either. He chose to start with one he'd seen once, the water dragon jutsu. Naruto went to Kakashi for this one, recalling the man copying the technique during his battle with Zabuza. He was a little disappointed with what he learned, however. Kakashi, while not against training him in the technique seeing as he'd learned the Kage Bunshin, made it a point to tell Naruto that unlike the mist technique, he would forever need a water source in order to create the dragon. While that little piece of news made Naruto upset for a while, he soon looked past it. He had practiced with the hidden mist jutsu constantly, and now was able to perform the technique with ease, covering the whole of Training Ground 7's clearing in a matter of minutes. This gave Naruto hope that he could eventually do the same with the water dragon. Then, during one of his trips to the library, he found a saving grace. After team training with Kakashi-sensei, Naruto was trying to figure out how he would carry around a water source big enough for his dragon to be effective. The dragon was a mass of water simply laced with chakra to hold it together. Meaning that he would need a lot of water to make a battle-effective attack. He found it in a water jutsu scroll, its name, the exploding water shockwave. Naruto learned that this technique was exactly what he needed. The user shot copious amounts of water straight from their mouth in a vicious torrent, and even if the initial attack missed, you now had a small lake of water to perform other water jutsu with. And to top it off, the amount of water was relative to the amount of chakra the user had to spare. It was perfect. That had been something Kakashi had informed him of after asking to learn the water dragon. The silver-haired Junin explained that, the higher a jutsu's level, the easier it would be for Naruto to perform it because he had the chakra to pump into it. This also worked with the hidden mist jutsu because the mist was laced heavily with the user's chakra. But it also had the drawback that, normal low-level jutsu would be harder to master without proper chakra control because he had to focus such small amounts into them. So, Naruto set out to learn the water-style technique, and then got to work on creating his dragons. Now, 3 months later, Naruto felt good about his standing among the genin pack. While still not one of the smartest members, Naruto knew he was definitely one of the strongest. Although, he mumbled to himself as he walked towards his team's meeting spot, I should definitely work out my brain too. Zabuza was pretty clever, and he also had knowledge of foreign ninja as well as techniques. I'll need to start checking out some reading material when I head to the library now too. It was about 15 minutes before Naruto made it to the bridge Kakashi-sensei had told them to meet him at. The man had mentioned wanting to do some sparring before he decided to make an announcement. Once he arrived, the blonde noticed that his other two teammates had beaten him to the bridge. Sasuke was leaning against the railing with his eyes closed, and Sakura was seated on the other end. She would periodically glance over at her crush with pink cheeks. "Good morning, Sakura-chan," Naruto greeted with a smile. Then, turning his eyes towards the other male, he grumbled, "Hey Sasuke-tem." While Sasuke only acknowledged his greeting with a grunt, Sakura matched him with her own, "Good morning." The pink-haired girl also took a moment to take in the sight of her blonde teammate. She noticed immediately how much more muscular he was than Sasuke, his lack of a shirt giving her a clear view of his growing pectoral muscles and his abs. Naruto seemed to be running hand in hand with puberty. There were no deeply cut lines, but the pinkett could see the strong, budding definition. The blonde's shoulders had also widened and become broader, no doubt to help shoulder the weight of the massive blade strapped to his back. Sakura could also see the strength in his calves thanks to the cargo shorts he wore. The blonde's face, however, was still hidden beneath a mask of bandages from the nose down. Another thing that seemed to work to the boy's advantage was something that, usually, got him laughed at. Because he was so short, the blonde's steady transformation was much more compact and noticeable. But his physique wasn't all about Naruto that was changing. Over the course of the months since Wave, Sakura began to notice that the gap between Naruto and Sasuke was inching close day by day. It had gotten to where the Uchiha was forced to use his Sharingan if Naruto removed his weights. And even before then, Sasuke would tire far faster than Naruto, eventually giving him the lead. This shocked Sakura because she always felt that Naruto was just as everyone always said, a no-talent loser. Someone who, no matter what, would never truly amount to much in terms of being a shinobi. And yet here he was giving the Rookie of the Year trouble. That's only because Kakashi-sensei spends more time watching over Naruto Baka than Sasuke-kun. He'd be 10 times better than that blonde punk if sensei would train him more. Inner Sakura butted in. But Sakura couldn't help agreeing with her. Their Junin instructor had been spending a lot of time with the former dead last, so it stood to reason that the kid would improve in leaps and bounds. Maybe she should say something about that today. "Hello there," came a voice from above. 3 sets of eyes turned upward, and were greeted by the sight of Kakashi seated atop the archway at the end of the bridge. "You're late again, Kakashi-sensei. That's like the 100th time." Sakura shouted in irritation. "Sorry about that," the Junin smiled. "A black cat crossed my path and I had to retrace my steps." Liar. Naruto, wanting to get on with training, broke up the argument. "All right, well, since you're here now, how about we get this show on the road? Eager, aren't we, Naruto? But that's fine, if you 3 will follow me, we'll begin today's training." The foursome headed to their usual training ground. After arriving, Kakashi said, "Okay, so, I want to see how far each of you has come in the time since we've been back. My hope is that our mission to Wave has helped open your eyes to the reality of being a ninja, so we're going to have some spars." "But Kakashi-sensei, how is that any different from what we've been doing?" asked Sakura. And she was right, they'd just sparred together 2 weeks ago. A new voice came from behind the tree line. "Simple, Sakura, you'll be facing me." All 3 genin looked over, and their eyes widened in surprise when Iruka-sensei walked out to greet them. Naruto's face broke out into a cheerful expression at seeing one of his favorite people. "Hey Iruka-sensei, what are you doing here?" As he turned his gaze to address the cheerful blonde, the scarred Chunin was surprised at the image before him. Kakashi did mention that Naruto was different, but this is more than even I expected. Pushing those thoughts aside, and deciding to just be happy at seeing his favorite student again, Iruka smiled in return. "Kakashi asked me to come by and help him out in measuring your progress. I was more than happy to lend a hand. I can't wait to see how much you've grown, Naruto." "All right, you 3, who wants to go first?" Kakashi asked. Sakura turned to her instructor, her mouth hanging open and an incredulous look on her face. "But sensei, Iruka-sensei is a Chunin, how do you expect us to win against him?" I don't, Sakura. He still has years of experience over you three, but if you've used this past month correctly, then you'll at least stand a chance. Oh, and thank you for volunteering to go first, Sakura. The young Kunoichi just let her mouth drop to the floor, before pulling herself together, and walking out onto the training field across from Aruka. As she made her way over, the emerald-eyed girl thought over how she spent her time after the wave mission. When not watching Naruto and Sasuke train under Kakashi-sensei or doing a mission with the team, Sakura usually read up on various ninjutsu, or genjutsu, and learning how to defeat each one. She had also read how to escape certain traps as well as how to set them up. Unfortunately, the pink-haired Kunoichi didn't take any time to practice her taijutsu or actually learn any of the ninjutsu she studied. I just hope I can last, Sakura thought as she entered into the basic academy stance. Across from her, Aruka had to keep from shaking his head in disappointment. The academy style was meant solely for those who had not found a style of their own yet. Many ninja without a clan, after receiving their headband, went straight to the library and found a new one without so many holes. It seems Sakura may not be taking this as seriously as I'd hoped she would. I guess we'll just have to see, the Chunin thought as Kakashi began the match. Sakura opened with a textbook maneuver, throwing kunai to force the enemy off their feet. Following this, Sakura created 3 clones of herself and rushed forward. However, instead of avoiding the kunai, Aruka simply pulled out one of his own, and deflected the knives. This left him on guard for his opponent's attack. Sakura tried to shake him up with her clones, but the Chunin could see which copies of the girl made no presence in the grass, allowing him to ignore the leg sweep and roundhouse that came at him while blocking the jab to his stomach. With her strategy ignored and her attack blocked, Sakura had to think fast. She pulled another kunai from her holster and took a slash at Aruka, only for him to grab that wrist as well. The next thing Sakura knew was pain. Her former instructor headbutted her, and with him wearing his forehead protector and hers tied like a bandana, Sakura immediately went weak in the knees from the impact. Aruka let go of the kunoichi's wrists and watched as she sank to the ground, her hands swiftly coming up to try and soothe the aching in her forehead. With a sigh, the scarred ninja turned to his superior and said, "Kakashi, what is this? She's been your student for about half a year, why is she still using the academy taijutsu and tactics? I've told her already what she needs to work on, Aruka, but it seems she hasn't listened to a word I've said. I'll be sure to spend some time whipping her into shape. Hopefully you'll be more impressed with my other 2 students," Kakashi replied. Sakura was quickly escorted off the field and to the sidelines while Sasuke took center stage. The Uchiha entered into the basic stance of his family's taijutsu and waited for Aruka to come to him. Aruka knew this was Sasuke's preferred method of fighting, because it allowed the younger ninja to read his opponent's moves and then react to them accordingly. This way, Sasuke could measure their speed, strength, and fighting style all in one. Well then, if it's me who's supposed to make the first move, might as well make it a good one. The pony-tailed Chunin disappeared in a burst of speed and reappeared to Sasuke's right. Aruka slid his foot behind the Uchiha's leg and then drove his arm forward in a close line to the throat. With his leg behind Sasuke's, the raven-haired youth tumbled backwards, but managed to catch himself and perform a leg sweep. Aruka jumped over the counterattack and then flipped backwards out of Sasuke's range, but it seemed Sasuke wasn't about to let him run away. The younger ninja rushed after his superior and attacked with a roundhouse kick. Aruka blocked it with his forearm and pushed it away, before retaliating with a right hook. Sasuke saw it coming but couldn't move fast enough to dodge it, so he let it hit, and then used the momentum to carry into an elbow attack that landed squarely in his opponent's chest. The Uchiha followed this up with a scissor kick to the chin. However, Aruka recovered faster than he'd expected, and managed to grab a hold of Sasuke's ankles. From there the Chunin lifted Sasuke higher and finally slammed his back into the ground. Sasuke coughed up a bit of bile due to the harsh impact, but quickly pushed past the pain and rolled backwards out of Aruka's reach. Once a sufficient distance away, the young ninja ran through a series of hand signs before calling out his attack. Fire style. Great Fireball Jutsu. After Iruka easily avoided it using the replacement technique, Kakashi called for a stop to the match. Why? Sasuke asked. I could still fight, and I hadn't even used my Sharingan yet. Kakashi just smiled and replied, I know, but remember, these spars are just so I can see how you've all progressed. And you've done very well, Sasuke. Managing to hold your own against a Chunin after being a genin for such a short time is no easy task. Sasuke just grunted and moved to the sidelines next to Sakura, who was still nursing her wound. However, this didn't stop the girl from congratulating her crush. Way to go, Sasuke-kun. You were amazing against Iruka-sensei. If you had used your Sharingan, I think you may have beaten him. But the raven-haired youth ignored her, choosing instead to focus on the next match. Naruto had gotten significantly stronger over the last few months, and Sasuke wanted to know how the blonde would stack up against a Chunin now. Would he do better than Sasuke, or worse? Naruto pulled Kubikiribocho from his back, and then removed the ankle weights and wristbands from his body as well. While he wanted to show off his skills in Kenjutsu, the blonde had decided that against his old teacher such a thing was unnecessary. Sasuke on the other hand had a different thought. What's the matter, loser? Can't swing the sword. What's the point of carrying it around if you don't use it? But Naruto just ignored the smart-mouthed Uchiha. It was true though, Sasuke had never seen Naruto wield the infamous blade since he'd brought it home, but that was because Naruto decided that during spars against a fellow teammate it was dangerous. The blonde became completely serious when he unsheathed his sword, and he didn't think Sasuke would be able to handle him then. So Naruto just moved to his side of the field and entered into his opening stance. Iruka was interested in the stance his former student took up. His feet were shoulder-width apart, knees bent, and his left arm was held to the side at a 90-degree angle, his hand balled up into a fist. The blonde's right arm was held up and bent inwards, the forearm blocking his face, while the hand was formed like a claw. Asterisk. The King's Fist, an appropriate taijutsu for Naruto. Let's see how far he's come with it. Iruka thought with pride, before being shocked as Naruto disappeared from view. What the? Ah! The Chunin cried out as his legs were swept from under him from behind. While managing to catch himself, the man's attempt at a retaliation kick failed, as Naruto had expected it and moved away beforehand. Iruka righted himself and kept his eyes trained on the blonde before him. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, it seemed. Deciding to take a page from Sasuke's book, Iruka weaved through the same hand signs, and sent a decently sized fireball towards Naruto. However, where the Chunin expected him to dodge it, and set himself up to be attacked, Naruto simply weaved through his own set of signs before using his exploding water shockwave to punch a hole straight through the fire. The speedy torrent hit Iruka dead center in the chest, but the man's body was soon replaced by a log. Naruto cancelled his attack, and strained his already impressive hearing to catch any clue to his opponent's next move. It paid off, as the blonde threw up his forearms in and cross-blocked to defend against a hammer fist from above. Afterwards, the Uzumaki countered with a Spartan kick that caught the unguarded shinobi and sent him flying. But Iruka wasn't a Chunin for nothing. The man quickly righted himself and was prepared for his former student's next move, which came in the form of a trio of cage bunshin. The three Narutos came at him in a triangle formation. As he jumped over one's leg sweep, the second was there to hit him with a roundhouse. As he blocked the kick in midair, Iruka was left open to the third kick that was aimed at his back. The last clone sent him flying forward before they all dispelled. This made Iruka an easy target for Naruto's next attack, the Water Dragon Jutsu. With the field flooded with water from his previous attack, the blonde had plenty to work with. Next thing Iruka knew, he was being hit head-on by a B-ranked ninjutsu. Alright, I think that's enough, Naruto. Good job. Kakashi called out, putting an end to the spars. Naruto quickly strode over to help Iruka up off the ground. You've definitely come a long way from being the knucklehead class clown Naruto. The academy instructor praised. Thanks Haruka-sensei. It really means a lot to hear you say that. But I know you weren't really trying, or else I never would have landed those hits. You underestimate yourself, Naruto. A Chunin is only as good as his training after all. Now, when did you learn such an advanced technique like the water dragon? Baruka asked in wonder. Naruto's eyes shined happily as he replied, Kakashi-sensei taught it to me, pretty cool huh? At this point Kakashi cut in, yes, we get it Naruto, you're becoming a force to be reckoned with. Now, Baruka, what's your opinion of them? The scarred Chunin swept his eyes over Team 7 before turning back to Kakashi. Letting out a sigh, Baruka said, I really wish you'd wait another year before doing this, Kakashi. But, I can't disagree that this will be good for them. It'll give them a good idea of what they're up against concerning the other village's ninja, as well as tell them where they stand among their fellow Leaf Shinobi. I concede. Kakashi-sensei, what's he talking about? Asked Sakura. The Junin turned to the kunoichi of his team and answered, what he's talking about, Sakura, is how I've recently nominated you three for the Chunin exams. All three genin looked back and forth between the two older ninja before Naruto said, well now, this will be fun, and I'll even get to see how I stack up against the competition. Thanks Kakashi-sensei. You're welcome Naruto. Now, here's your registration forms. The exams will begin 5 days from now at 3 p.m. sharp. You are to go to the academy building and wait in room 301 for your first proctor. Kakashi instructed as he handed each genin a small form to fill out. With that, the silver-haired Junin bid his students good luck and left via Shunshin. Baruka quickly followed, mentioning how he'd only asked his substitute teacher to stay half the day. Once the three were alone, Sasuke sighed and made to leave, throwing over his shoulder, I'll see you guys at the academy, don't be late. Sakura, seeing the Uchiha leaving, called out. Hey wait, Sasuke-kun, why don't you and I spend the 5 days together? You know, do something personal to help build our teamwork. The Uchiha heir stopped and looked over his shoulder. Sakura was immediately put off by the look in his onyx black eyes, and it got worse as he opened his mouth. Or how about you use the 5 days to work on your skills? Even Haruka-sensei said you needed help, so instead of flirting and primping yourself up to look pretty, why don't you learn a new taijutsu form and a couple of genjutsu? You know, things to help make the team stronger. With his piece said and done, Sasuke turned and continued his walk home, caring nothing for the girl he just left torn apart in the field. Sakura's head and shoulders slumped in defeat at her love interest's words. Naruto, seeing this, made an attempt to cheer his crush up. Hey, Sakura-chan, why don't you and I train together? Forget about Sasuke-tem, he's not even that tough, heck I can already beat him. If we train together you'll get stronger in no time. Her response was nothing like he'd expected. Sakura began to tremble, and while at first he thought she was going to cry, Naruto was quickly on guard when the pink-haired Kunoichi turned to him with anger in her eyes. Why can't you just back off, Naruto baka? I don't wanna hang out with you. I've lost count of how many times we've been through this. Why can't you just listen? Naruto, for his part, couldn't help feeling hurt. Sure, she had said something along those lines, but the blonde didn't think she really meant them. But now, for the second time, Sakura was telling him to really get lost. Saying that she'd rather be alone without Sasuke than give him a chance. The blonde genin's ocean blue eyes lowered in resignation. He felt there wasn't even a point in asking if she thought of him as a friend, seeing as a friend would have let him down a lot more gently than Sakura had. Finally, Naruto managed to pick his eyes up and look at the pink-haired girl that still stood before him. Okay Sakura, I'm sorry, I hear you and I won't bother you anymore. I'll see you at the exams. And with that, the blonde made his own exit, leaving Sakura to also walk home alone, and his dream of them together to fade into the wind. XXX. Naruto's eyes opened slowly as the morning sun peeked through his window. As he sat up and stretched, the blonde genin's fuzzy mind slowly rebooted from being sent into hibernation mode during the night. That's when he recalled the day before. He was entering the Chunin exams in 4 days. Immediately after this thought, Naruto's unwrapped face broke into a foxy grin, and the young Uzumaki jumped out of bed in excitement. There were sure to be lots of other genin taking the test, and from what Iruka-sensei said, many of them would be from foreign villages. This meant Naruto would already be able to start making a name for himself. This is gonna be great, he thought as he made himself a bowl of cereal. As he ate, the blonde thought about how he should spend the next 4 days. While at first he thought of training, the young ninja quickly discarded that thought. It wouldn't do for someone to see his skills before the test. Then he thought about how he'd made it a point to learn more general knowledge, and decided to spend his time at the library. With his game plan set, Naruto finished his cereal and got ready for the day. Once his morning routine was finished, the blonde set about getting dressed. He slipped on a pair of cargos and a hooded vest, before attaching his weights and weapon pouches, and finishing it off by rewrapping his face and tying on his forehead protector. After a look in the mirror, and with a look of satisfaction at what he saw, Naruto exited his home. Once again leaving his sword, so as not to give anything away to the competition. As he walked through the streets, Naruto immediately took notice of some of the foreigners that had already entered the village. But it wasn't hard, they had different symbols on their headbands than him after all. Many of them looked like nothing special, just your run-of-the-mill genin, but one person did catch his attention. A girl with shocking red hair. This girl interested Naruto because he'd never seen anyone with that color hair before. Sure, Sakura's was pink, but so was her mom's. Red was a hair color that Naruto hadn't ever seen on anyone in his village before. Taking a closer look at the girl before he lost sight of her, Naruto took in the glasses on her face, and her unusual eye color as well. The blonde had to admit, the girl was kind of cute. The girl must have felt his eyes on her though, because she began to turn her head, which forced Naruto to look away, lest he be caught staring and cause a scene. After he turned a corner, and was out of sight, the blonde returned to his journey and headed for the library. His mind stuck on what kind of ninja would have red hair. XXX. How can there be nothing? Are ninja with red hair really not that weird? Naruto groaned as he thumbed through his 5th aisle of books and scrolls. He'd been there for almost an hour and still hadn't found anything. Maybe red hair just wasn't common in his village, but was everywhere else. As he was about to slip his latest pick back into its spot on the shelf, a flash of purple caught his eye and he turned to look. He was met with the sight of Enko entering the aisle he was in. In her own hands was a blue book, and she too had a look of annoyance on her face. Couldn't find what you were looking for either? He asked in an attempt to make conversation. With her eyes downcast in disappointment, Enko didn't see who had been speaking, and when she turned them up to make sure the person was talking to her, she greeted with a sight she hadn't expected. I recognize the voice, but not the face, so is this what the Kyuubi Jinchuriki really looks like? She thought to herself. As she took him in, Enko realized that the young teen in front of her wasn't at all what she'd been expecting. She'd heard the tales of his pranks from other members of the T&I department, and while she found many of them funny, the special Junin knew a cry for attention when she saw one. But this genin didn't look like the type to care about such things. Enko took in how the clothes looked on the now blonde-haired ninja. The vest didn't hang loosely from his frame, instead it stretched a little under his athletic torso. His arms showed clear signs of growing muscle, and his shoulders were strong. Looking up at his face, the kunoichi had to force herself not to laugh. Was he taking after Kakashi now? After her quick observation, Enko decided to reply, "No, unfortunately I didn't." "And from the sound of it, neither did you." Shaking his head, Naruto answered, "Nope." "So what were you trying to find?" "If there was anywhere else besides Konoha that sold Goma Dango, but there isn't." Enko replied, her shoulders slumping in discouragement. Naruto stared at her for a moment, as if expecting her to suddenly tell him she was kidding, but when she didn't, he asked, "Are you serious?" The annoyed look he got was more than enough proof. Anko held up the book she'd been reading, showing it to be an international food journal, and said, "Of course I am. When I'm out on a mission, there's always a chance I'll end up slumming it in another village, so it'd be nice to know I can still have my favorite food away from home. But I'm finding out nobody except Konoha makes it." She growled at the end, folding her arms in frustration. Naruto didn't know what to make of the sight. Here was a woman, a kunoichi no less, that looked to be a few years older than him, pouting like a child over sweets. He couldn't hold back a small laugh. They stood close enough though that Anko could hear it. Narrowing her eyes, she challenged, "Oh yeah, well, what was so important that you couldn't find?" This got Naruto to immediately stop laughing. The blonde knew that his quest was just as silly, and to reveal it would be embarrassing after laughing at Anko's misfortune. However, the choice was taken from him, when Anko simply plucked the yellow book from his hand and read the cover. It was deathly quiet, and Naruto waited for the inevitable jibe, but it didn't come. Instead, a teasing grin etched its way onto Anko's face as she asked, "Sue, interested in kunoichi with odd hair colors, huh? I guess I left a better impression on you than I thought back at the clothing store, huh?" Whatever Naruto had been expecting, this wasn't it. As the special Junin held up the book, showing off the title of Legendary Kunoichi with Strange Hair Colors, Naruto's face lit up like a cherry. "What? No, it's nothing like that, okay. I saw this girl from another village, and she had red hair, so I wondered if that meant anything special. That's all, really," the flustered young teen explained. At this, Anko's playful smile broke down into a pout. "What, am I not good enough for you, Gaki?" She couldn't really see it, but Anko was sure the blonde's mouth was wide open. Unable to keep up her charade, the special Junin broke out into laughter as she slipped the two books back onto the shelf, not caring if they were in the right spot. The older woman's laughter broke Naruto out of his stupor, and then he pouted as he grumbled quietly to himself. After getting a hold of herself, Anko patted the younger ninja on the shoulder and said, "Ah, don't get all upset on me now, kid. I wasn't serious. Besides, there's a height requirement for anyone who wants to make a move on me." Hearing the barb at his lower than average height, Naruto's expression swiftly molded into one of fierce annoyance. "Yeah, well, you're too tall." "Wait," the blonde stopped, suddenly remembering something. "How did you know it was me at the store?" Anko met his curious stare with a smirk as she answered, "My best friend is the village's leading expert in genjutsu. She spotted your henge from across the store. I suspected something, and when I asked her about Kurenai, told me it was you. Apparently you have an easily recognizable chakra signature." That last part interested the blonde genin. Chakra signature, he thought. What was that? But before he could ask her, Anko looked at the watch on her wrist and said, "And speaking of Nai-chan, I'm supposed to meet her after her team's meeting. I'd better go now. She's such a pain when I'm late. See ya later, shrimp." With that, the purple-haired woman left in a swirl of smoke, leaving Naruto alone. While slightly discouraged he couldn't ask about chakra signatures, the young Uzumaki quickly remembered he was in a library, and headed off to the shinobi section to find a scroll on the subject. XXX. As Naruto studied up on his newest interest, Anko appeared along the branch of a tree that overlooked one of the Leaf's many training grounds. This one in particular was being used by the members of Team 8. Standing off to the side was her friend, Kurenai Yuhi. The older woman's attention was concentrated on the two students that were currently sparring. One was a young male. He wore a gray, hooded jacket with fur lining all its openings. He was a tanned young teen, with feral features, and triangular tattoos on his cheeks. This young genin was Kiba Inuzuka. Kiba's opponent was a young girl. She too wore a hoodie, though hers was a cream color and significantly baggier than her male teammates. The young kunoichi had a head of dark, blue-tinted hair and fair skin. But her most recognizable feature were her eyes. This young girl had a pair of pupil-less, lavender eyes. She was Hinata Hyuga. At the moment Kiba and Hinata were each attempting to overcome the other's defenses, though Enko could see that it was only Kiba who was really trying. So, while Hinata was doing a good job of holding her own, she was slowly being defeated. Enko shook her head, not able to understand why such a promising kunoichi was so hesitant. However, as she turned her attention back to Kurenai, to see her reactions, Enko wound up locking gazes with her fellow Junin. Smiling, the purple-haired woman dismounted her perch, and walked over to Kurenai. Throwing up her hand in greeting she said, "Hey, how's the training going?" The red-eyed Junin nodded in greeting, before turning her attention back to her students and asking, "Why don't you tell me? You were just watching them." "Yeah, you noticed that huh? Anyway, what's the deal with your kunoichi? She's barely even trying against her teammate. Is she sick or something?" Kurenai shook her head, letting out a sigh as she replied, "No, that's Hinata. She's not very confident in her ability to be a ninja, and unfortunately it's to the point where she second-guesses every move she makes. Resulting in what you see here." As she explained it, Hinata was being brought down by her enthusiastic opponent, and soon found herself lying flat on her back, having had her legs knocked from under her. With that Kurenai called out, "Okay you two, that's enough for today, you guys can head home. Be sure to come to the meeting on time tomorrow. I have something important I want to discuss with you." As they were leaving, Kiba eyed his Junin instructor and asked, "What about Shino? He couldn't make it to practice today, how's he gonna know?" "When Shino informed me he wouldn't be here today, I explained that we'd be meeting tomorrow as well, and I expressed the same desire for promptness as I did with you. What I have to say tomorrow is important." The explanation being good enough for him, Kiba exited the clearing, after waving goodbye to his female teammate. Hinata, muttering a quiet goodbye of her own, also left the training ground. Once the genin were out of earshot, Enko looked over to her friend and asked, "So you're really gonna enter them into the Chunin exams?" As the two women made their own exit, Kurenai replied, "Yes. They may just be rookies, but I have faith in their ability to succeed. Each of them shows great promise as a shinobi and I truly believe they have a chance of doing well in the exams." "And how do you think they'll do against the other rookie teams?" Enko asked, her mind conjuring the image of the blonde she'd just left. "There aren't too many I'm worried about. Aside from Sasuke Uchiha and Shikamaru Nara, I don't think my team has any real competition. The other 6 just aren't up to par yet. I really can't believe Asuma and Kakashi think their teams are ready for the exams." Enko eyes the elder Kunoichi curiously, as the woman's slightly arrogant tone was unlike her, but decided the woman knew her students better than the special Junin and just had faith in their abilities. XXX. Naruto walked through the streets of his village, not really having a destination in mind, merely enjoying the lively activity and the nice weather. He'd spent a few hours at the library, studying up on chakra signatures, and then researching the different hidden villages. While Konoha's knowledge wasn't very extensive, those places not being very open with their information, Naruto did learn a little bit about the different types of ninja there were in the world. While some of it had been boring, the blonde never having been one for book learning, Naruto forced himself to concentrate on the pages and the information written on them. No one would take an uneducated shinobi seriously, and the blonde couldn't afford anything less. Now, with the studying put on hold, Naruto just let himself wander. It was as he walked through one of the empty streets that Naruto heard a shuffling sound behind him. The spiky-haired ninja looked back, and was met with the sight of a crudely done disguise in the shape of a rock. A square rock. Letting out a disheartened sigh, Naruto called out, "Really, Konohamaru? When have you ever seen a rock shaped like a perfect square, especially one with eye holes? You always manage to see through my disguise, boss." A voice called out under said garb, before the box erupted into a large cloud of colored smoke, revealing 3 young academy students. The first was Konohamaru. He'd gotten rid of his long scarf, and wore a dark green shirt with brown shorts. a vast improvement from his yellow and white attire. To the boy's right was a young girl. She had her orange hair done up into two very large pigtails. She wore a red t-shirt and brown shorts. Standing at Konohamaru's left was another young boy, this one also a brunette. He wore glasses, a baggy, long-sleeved blue shirt and khaki shorts. He also had a runny nose. All three wore the goggles he once wore before becoming a genin. Naruto watched as the three youngsters introduced themselves as the Konohamaru Ninja Squad. "So these are your friends from the academy, Kan?" Naruto asked as he eyed the two other children. "Yep, I was talking to Iruka-sensei about the spar we had the other day and they overheard." Moegi and Udon asked if I could introduce you to them after hearing how strong you are. Both of the aforementioned academy students nodded excitedly in agreement before the girl. Moegi asked, "Is it true you're training Konohamaru outside of school, Naruto-san?" "When I get the chance, yes. I want to make sure Konohamaru gets as much help as possible so that when he becomes a genin I won't have to worry about him out in the field." Naruto replied. "So does that mean you'll teach us?" Udon asked hopefully. But before Naruto could answer, an undignified snort interrupted his train of thought. "This is what you do in your free time, hang around with little kids." The small group turned their attention to the voice that had spoken, and were greeted with the sight of Sakura walking towards them. As the Pinkett approached, Naruto had to chomp down his usual greeting, and instead asked, "And what if it is? What's wrong with helping others get stronger, Sakura? I offered the same to you, but you just threw it back in my face," he thought sadly. "What's wrong is you should be preparing for the Chunin exams, not playing games, Naruto baka. I don't want you holding us back during the test." Naruto's brow furrowed in confusion, but Sakura, Iruka-sensei said you were the one who needed help. He was more than impressed with my performance, remember? While Naruto hadn't meant for it to be taken as an insult, merely a pointing out of fact, Sakura took it as a barb at her skills. And coming from Naruto, the class clown, that was unacceptable. "What do you know, dead last? If you weren't always pestering Kakashi-sensei then maybe he'd have more time to train me and Sasuke-kun." But before Naruto could respond, Konohamaru's voice rang out in a whine. "Man, Naruto-nisan, is this what you have to put up with all the time? I think I'm gonna blow an eardrum if she keeps this up. What is she, some kind of harpy?" Naruto never got to ask where the young Sarutobi even heard that word before, because Sakura's anger skyrocketed at the insult. "What did you just call me? Cha, I'm gonna pound that little runt." Inner Sakura raged along with her. As she made a move to grab Konohamaru, the young boy managed to slip away, and then he turned and ran, with Sakura hot on his heels. Naruto just sighed and, looking to the remaining two kids, said, "Well, we should probably go after them. Come on, and if she hasn't killed him I'll spend some time helping you guys train." It wasn't long before they found the two, but when they did, Naruto's eyes immediately narrowed in anger. After turning the fence corner, Naruto and the two children found Konohamaru being held up by the throat, while Sakura stood off to the side trying to stammer out an apology. Naruto took in the guy holding his friend hostage, but wasn't very impressed with what he saw. The guy, obviously a ninja, was tall. He was dressed in a black, baggy suit that covered his entire body and his face was lined with purple paint. On the guy's back was a wrapped bundle of cloth that had, what looked to be, a tuft of brown hair sticking out from the top. "Put him down, Kankuro. I don't feel like getting into trouble just because of your stupidity," a female voice said. This drew Naruto's attention to a girl that stood behind the now named Kankuro. She, like Anko, wore a full-body mesh suit under her clothes, which consisted of a lavender battle dress, tied at the waist by a crimson sash. Naruto noticed that she too was a blonde, though hers was sandy, and pulled back into 4 spiked pigtails. On her back she carried a giant battle fan. Konohamaru's cry of pain drew his attention back, and reignited his anger as he shouted, "You should listen to your teammates' advice. because if you don't let him go, there's gonna be trouble. The genin known as Kankuro turned his beady eyes in Naruto's direction, and with a sneer, said, "Oh great, more brats. This village must be full of em. Look, this little pipsqueak ran into me, and he hasn't apologized for it, so I'm a little mad. I wouldn't suggest making it worse. I'm giving you one last warning, let him go." Naruto replied, his eyes hardening like ice. And Kankuro did just that, only to reach behind him and pull his package from its place, and slam it on the ground. "You know what I think? You all need a lesson in manners," he growled. The blonde Kunoichi looked like she was about to say something, but before she could voice her words, Naruto vanished. "Well, you know what I think. Next time, you'd better think twice before challenging an opponent that's faster than you," a voice whispered from behind Kankuro, causing the puppet user's eyes to widen in shock. He whipped around, trying to catch his fellow genin with his elbow, but the attack missed and he was sent tumbling back after a palm strike to the chest. From his place on the ground, Kankuro seethed. Who the hell did this punk think he was? You surprised me there. I didn't think you'd be that fast, but next time I won't be caught off guard. Ouch. As he spoke, Kankuro made to get back on his feet, but a pebble to the side of the head stopped him, and drew everyone's attention to a tree beyond the fence. Sitting up on one of the branches was Sasuke, juggling another pebble in his hand. "You guys are a long way from home, and way out of your league," the last Uchiha warned before crushing the pebble in his hand. Looking between the two leaf shinobi, the sandy blonde smirked to herself. "Well, if nothing else, at least the Leaf Village guys are better looking than the ones back home." But the smirk soon turned to a look of fear as she sensed him. "Kankuro, get up and stop embarrassing yourself. You're a disgrace to our village." A raspy voice echoed through the area. While Sakura and the children couldn't seem to find the person, Naruto followed the two foreign shinobi's line of sight to the tree that Sasuke was seated on, and couldn't hold back his surprised look at what he saw. A red head stood, upside down, along the branch above Sasuke, who from the looks of it didn't sense the boy's presence until just that moment. The red head was dressed in a brown and black attire, with a mesh shirt underneath, and a large gourd strapped to his back. "Gaara, hey, it's not what it looks like. They started it," Kankuro tried to explain, but the boy, now named Gaara, cut him off. "Shut up, or I'll kill you." The boy's response shocked the Leaf Ninja. He'd kill his own teammate just for talking. Who the heck was this guy? But Naruto never took his eyes off him, and followed the other boy's moves as he vanished from the tree and moved to the ground via sand shunshin. In the light, Naruto was able to make out the kanji for love tattooed on Gaara's forehead. "I'm sorry for my teammates' idiotic behavior," Gaara said, breaking Naruto from his observation. "I warned them about acting foolish while visiting your village, but it seems they didn't take me seriously. I'll correct that behavior soon, and there won't be any more problems, I assure you." Wary of the trio, but not wishing any harm to come to the two troublemakers, Naruto said, "No, it's alright. We should have paid more attention to where we were going, it's us who should be apologizing." It seems Gaara could read his mind, because his next words were an introduction. "My name is Sabaku no Gaara, and you?" "Naruto Uzumaki. I take it you're here for the Chunin exams then?" "Yes, and I look forward to facing you in them, Naruto Uzumaki." With that, Gaara turned and began walking away, giving a non-verbal signal to his teammates to do the same. What nobody noticed was the trio staring down at them from atop a roof nearby. XXX. The next 4 days passed much the same for Naruto as the first, only significantly less drama. He woke up, went about his morning routine, then headed to the library to do some studying. Although he knew he'd have to look over certain subjects again in order to really remember them, like the different poisonous plants that grew around the continent, others he managed to pick up right away, like the basic knowledge of the Byakugan, the Hyuga clan's dojutsu. However, with his inability to train, Naruto became anxious as the days passed. The blonde practically bounced in his seat while eating as he thought about the Chunin exams. Then, finally, the day came. On the morning of the Chunin exams, Naruto leapt out of bed with a loud cheer. Yes, finally, the Chunin exams are here. I finally get to show everyone what I'm made of. The blonde's excitement was quieted when his eyes landed on Kubikiribocho, which he'd settled next to his bedroom door the night before. Seeing the large executioner's blade reminded Naruto about his plan, and sobered him up as the excitement was replaced with the feeling of responsibility. The exams were more than just a chance to advance, they were his first step towards honoring Zabuza. He was the heir to Kiri's demon now, and it was time everybody knew it.